to, man, I updated this, but on a different platform. Let me just fix it. Take any assignment after 3 or after 2, actually. Make it crash proof using both look before you leap and easier to ask for permission techniques. So I want you to use both techniques. And in using both techniques, you would probably think about these places to look. So when you're getting user input, that often generates an error. Doing a calculation, adding things to a list, saving or retrieving data. Those are places where you might have issues with this, errors. So real quick, I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to use the ATM because that's a good problem to look at. So I've got a couple of different things going on here. I've got depositing and withdrawing. So I'm going to use those for my 2 areas where I'm going to make sure that I have the right kind of information from the user. Okay. So one thing that I do is I want to check and make sure that when the user inputs something here or here, how much do you want to deposit? Notice that I'm converting it to a float right here in that same line of code. So right here, I could get an error. If they don't input something that is a valid float or an integer, I'm going to get an error. And the only way that I can get something in between input and float is to either separate those into 2 different lines so I can handle that error, or I could create a function and put input inside that function to check and make sure. Okay? To check and make sure that it works. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is I'm going to do the separation into 2 lines. So I'm going to take this out of here. And I'm going to make myself some space. And I'm going to say str amount equals that. So I'm asking them how much they want to deposit. They're going to enter something that is a string. And hopefully it's a string that is able to be converted into a float. Now I know that what things can be converted to a float and have it be a valid float are an integer or a float. Now, and checking for an integer is pretty easy. Checking for a float is a little bit hard because it doesn't pass the is numeric test, right? Because a string that's a float contains a period, which will fail the is numeric test. So how do I check to see if it's either an integer or a float disguised as a string? Well, it's actually not too hard, because if I have 5, the number 5, that's an integer, no problem. That passes the is numeric test. I can see if that definitely can be converted into a float, no problem. If I have a string, 532, this will fail the is numeric. So if I put this string and I check is numeric against it, it will come back false. So that won't work. But all I have to do is get rid of that, right? Take it out, and then I can check it and it should be numeric. So I have to remove 1 period from that string, and then it should be numeric. So watch the technique here, okay? So I'm going to create a new string called str_test. And in that string, I'm going to take str amount And I'm going to replace this one period with nothing. And I'm going to do that for only one, okay? Because if I know a float, like if I have 5.32.1, that's not a valid float. So if I remove one of those and there's still a period left in there, it's not a valid float. I want it to fail the test. But if I remove this and it's all numbers, then I'm in good shape. So I'm going to replace exactly one period with nothing, which just deletes the first period it finds from that string. Now, whether it was an integer or whether it was a float, that should be true, right? So if str test I was like, why is that giving me an error? There it is numeric. Then you need to enter a valid number. Okay. So now this will work this way. It's going to create that test. It doesn't change the amount. So it just says, is that amount a valid integer or float? If it is, because after I remove a period, it should have only numbers. If it is numeric, then we're going to turn it into a float. We're going to do the math and give them feedback. Otherwise, we're going to say you need to enter a valid number. That is look before you leap. That is look before you leap. Okay, so easier to ask for permission. Says this. Try. And this whole thing is going to be my try. I expect the error to happen right here on this line. So if the error happens here, if you have a try, you have to have an accept, print, you must enter a valid number. That's it. That's look before you leap up top, and this is easier to ask for permission, right? I am letting the error happen, and I'm catching it and giving feedback. That's it. Now, is this program crash proof? Not quite, but we took a big step forward, because the two places where it's most likely to crash are here and here. Okay, so what I've got going on up here, pretty safe. Yeah, we're looking pretty good here. But let's try and crash this program now. So we'll run it, and we're going to make a deposit, and we're going to go savings. How much do I want to deposit? Let's go without, no, let's just say hello. Okay, so there's my, you need to enter a valid number. Okay, so if I do a withdrawal, checking, oops, did I pick the wrong thing? I did. Checking. So let's make a withdrawal as 3. Checking. And how much I want to withdraw. Hi. Okay, so there's my, that was the easier to ask for permission. So the places where I can break this by entering something bad are pretty straightforward. Now, There's one more place where I could mess things up. So let's run it again. And I could say make a deposit. What account? Hello. How much? 500. Okay. There we go. I got another error there, didn't I? But that one was a key error. Why does it have a key error? Because hello is not one of my accounts. It doesn't exist. A key error says, I looked for that in the list because you told me it was there and it's not there. That's what a key error means. The key doesn't exist. So this one, here's an interesting thing. This one, look before you leap, right? Made sense here, but it's not going to catch that account because if that key error happens, I would need to check also to make sure that that account exists. So I might put it here and say, make sure the account exists. I might put another if statement inside of there. A few different ways to do it. So the other one, the exception, if I just say except key error, print that account doesn't exist. Now I've taken care of that problem. So I've done both of those very quickly and easily. So there are certainly times where using one type of error handling is much simpler from a code perspective than another. So if I run this again, and I want to make a withdrawal, and I put in a different account than what exists, then I get the message that account doesn't exist. And you saw how dead simple that was. All I did was add a couple lines of code to catch that particular type of error. And it dealt with that. This one, again, I'm going to have to check to see before I do this if that account exists. And then I can do that. So there's a lot more layers. It's another layer of nesting. It's an if else. I wouldn't do it that way in production. But I would use the easier to ask for permission, for forgiveness and permission. So all that to say is you can choose any assignment. Make sure that it's complex enough that you have space in that assignment to do both types of error handling. That's the only constraint. But if you can figure it out to use both types of error handling in any assignment past like assignment 2, so like 3 on, I think that's the calculator assignment. So you should be able to do error handling in that one, I would think. Prior to that, it's too basic. So try to pick a good assignment that just allows you can reuse all the code that you had for that assignment, just copy and paste it into a new file and add error handling. And that's it for this assignment.